History loves its great conquerors, but what about the ones who conquered fear itself? This is the story of Shaka Zulu, a man who transformed a minor clan of 1,500 people into a military empire that crushed armies 10 times its size, but at a price so terrible that his own brothers would ultimately turn against him. Here's the mind-blowing part. Shaka didn't just defeat his enemies on the battlefield. He rewrote the very DNA of warfare by doing something no leader had ever dared. He made retreat punishable by death, not just for deserters, but for any warrior who so much as glanced backward during battle. How does an illegitimate outcast become the most feared military genius in African history? How does a man create an empire by weaponizing courage itself? And what happens when absolute discipline meets absolute power? The year is 1816. Southern Africa simmers with tribal tensions as the Great Migration patterns shift and resources grow scarce. Small Nguni clans clash over cattle and territory in what historians call the Mafakane, the crushing. But these are traditional raids, governed by ancient rules where warriors retreat when honor is satisfied, where warfare has limits, where mercy exists. Into this world of ritualized conflict steps a bastard prince with a vision so radical it will reshape an entire continent. Shaka Zulu doesn't just want to win battles. He wants to break the very concept of defeat. His innovation isn't a new weapon or tactic. It's something far more dangerous, the complete elimination of the option to fail. Picture the traditional Zulu warrior. He carries a long assegai spear, designed for throwing from a distance. He wears minimal armor because battles are supposed to be quick affairs. Show of force, honor satisfied, everyone goes home. Retreat is not shameful. It's practical. Look backward to assess the situation? Obviously. Check if your friends need help? Natural human instinct. Shaka sees all of this and thinks, weakness. What if retreat were impossible? What if looking backward meant death? What if every warrior knew that the only way home was through the enemy? Shaka's story begins with rejection. Born around 1787 to Senzangakona, chief of the small Zulu clan, and Nandi, a woman from the Langeni people, his very existence violates tribal custom. His father refuses to acknowledge him initially, claiming Nandi is merely pregnant with an intestinal condition called Shaka, the beetle. The name sticks, marking him as unwanted from birth. But rejection becomes Shaka's forge. Exiled with his mother to the Langeni clan, he grows up an outsider, watching, learning, burning with ambition. The other boys mock his mixed heritage, his unusual height, his intense stare. They have no idea they're creating a monster. Everything changes when Shaka reaches manhood and joins the army of Dingiswayo, chief of the powerful Mthethwa Confederation. Here, under a visionary leader who believes in meritocracy over bloodlines, the bastard prince finds his calling. But Shaka doesn't just excel at traditional warfare, he begins to question its very foundations. Watch him during his first major battle. While other warriors hurl their long spears and fall back to regroup, Shaka does something unprecedented. He charges forward with a short stabbing spear, the ikwa, that he's designed himself. Instead of throwing his weapon away, he keeps it, getting close enough to look his enemies in the eye as he kills them. His shield isn't just for protection. It's a weapon, used to hook and pull aside enemy shields, creating openings for the ikwa. The psychological impact is devastating. Enemies expect long-range skirmishing followed by negotiated withdrawal. Instead, they face a warrior who closes distance relentlessly, whose weapon never leaves his hand, who seems physically incapable of backing down. But Shaka's innovations go deeper than weapons. He begins to study the warriors around him with scientific precision. Why do men retreat? Because they can. Why do battles end inconclusively? Because both sides preserve their strength for the next fight. Why do armies move slowly? Because warriors wear sandals and carry heavy gear. His solutions are brutal in their simplicity. Make retreat impossible through discipline. Make battles decisive through overwhelming force. Make armies swift by hardening the warriors themselves. The sandal solution becomes legend. Shaka forces his men to march barefoot over thorns and rocky ground until their feet become like leather. Anyone who shows pain is beaten. Anyone who requests sandals is executed. If your feet are soft, he declares, your heart is soft. When Senzangakona dies in 1816, Shaka sees his moment. With Dingiswayo's backing, he returns to claim leadership of the Zulu clan. But his half-brother Sigujana has been named heir. Traditional Zulu politics would suggest negotiation, power sharing, perhaps a split of the clan. Shaka has a different solution: assassination. The murder of Sigujana isn't just fratricide, it's a declaration of principles. Shaka is announcing that the old rules no longer apply. There will be no power sharing, no compromise, no mercy for obstacles to his vision. He now leads 1,500 warriors. Within months, that number will multiply beyond anyone's imagination. The transformation begins immediately. Shaka doesn't just reform the Zulu military. He rebuilds it from the ground up, starting with the most fundamental element: the warrior's relationship with fear. Traditional Zulu warfare operates like a deadly dance. Warriors advance in lines, throw spears, retreat to regroup, advance again. Battles can last days with minimal casualties because both sides understand the steps. It's warfare with a safety valve. Shaka eliminates the safety valve. His first innovation is the bull's horns formation, but it's not just tactical. It's psychological warfare perfected. The main force charges forward like the bull's chest, but two flanks sweep wide like horns to encircle the enemy. Here's the genius. Once the horns close, there's no escape for either side. His own warriors cannot retreat, because they'll be cut down by the enemy they've just surrounded. The enemy cannot retreat, because they're trapped. Everyone fights to the death because everyone must, but the formation only works with warriors who've been psychologically reconstructed. Shaka's training methods would make modern special forces commanders wince. Warriors who show fear during drills are beaten publicly. Those who fall behind during 50-mile forced marches are executed. Anyone who speaks of home during training is whipped for weakness of spirit. The most terrifying innovation: the death penalty for looking backward during battle. Not retreating, looking. The moment a warrior's head turns to check the situation behind him, he's marked for execution after the battle. Shaka posts observers throughout his forces, whose only job is to identify backward lookers. A warrior who looks behind, Shaka explains, has already retreated in his heart. The psychological conditioning is total. Shaka's warriors advance in perfect silence. No war cries, no shouting, just the sound of thousands of feet and the whistle of air through assegais. The silence is more terrifying than screaming. It suggests absolute control, inhuman discipline. Enemy tribes begin to surrender without fighting. Word spreads of warriors who never retreat, never break formation, never show mercy. The Zulu don't raid for cattle and women like other tribes. They absorb entire populations, growing stronger with each victory. By 1818, Shaka commands 20,000 warriors. The small Zulu clan has become the Zulu nation, and traditional tribal warfare has become industrial-scale military conquest. The neighboring Ndwandwe Confederacy under Zwide realizes the existential threat. This isn't about cattle raids anymore. It's about survival. They mobilize everything they have. 18,000 seasoned warriors, the largest army ever assembled in the region. The Battle of Gukli Hill becomes Shaka's masterpiece. Facing a larger, more experienced force, he does something unprecedented. He abandons his own territory. For days, he retreats, drawing Zwide's army deeper into Zulu lands, stretching their supply lines, exhausting them with forced marches. His own warriors begin to murmur. Are they fleeing? Has Shaka finally met his match? Then, at the perfect moment, on ground of his choosing, Shaka turns. The bull's horns formation deploys with mechanical precision. But this time, there's a twist. He's positioned the battle so the Ndwandwe have their backs to a river. When the horns close, it's not just encirclement, it's slaughter. Warriors who've never known defeat discover they have nowhere to run except into a river that becomes red with blood. Zwide's mighty confederation collapses in a single afternoon. But victory reveals something darker about Shaka's methods. His own casualties are minimal not just because of superior tactics, but because wounded Zulu warriors are abandoned on the battlefield. If you're too weak to keep up, Shaka declares, you're too weak to be Zulu. The conquered territories don't just submit. They're systematically broken down and rebuilt in Shaka's image. Traditional chiefs are replaced by his appointees. Young men are conscripted into age regiments that owe loyalty only to Shaka. Women become part of designated marriage cohorts, their reproduction controlled by the state. By 1820, Shaka rules an empire stretching from the Tugela River to Pongola, commanding over 100,000 people and 40,000 warriors. He's achieved something unprecedented in African history, a centralized military state that grows stronger with each conquest. But absolute discipline comes at an absolute price. The same iron will that eliminates cowardice begins to eliminate everything else Shaka perceives as weakness. Warriors who show too much emotion at a comrade's death are executed for softness. Those who marry without permission face death. Anyone who questions orders, even slightly, is impaled on stakes as an example to others. The line between military necessity and paranoid tyranny begins to blur. Shaka's innovations in warfare have created a machine of incredible efficiency. But machines don't have hearts. And heartless efficiency, applied to human society, becomes something monstrous. His mother Nandi, the one person who could moderate his extremes, dies in 1827. Shaka's response reveals how completely power has corrupted his humanity. He declares a year of mourning during which no crops can be planted, no milk consumed, no sexual relations allowed. Anyone who shows insufficient grief is executed. Thousands starve during Shaka's enforced mourning. The empire that conquered through strength begins to consume itself through madness. The same psychological mechanisms that eliminated cowardice from Shaka's army now turn inward, consuming the empire from within. By 1828, the revolution has become its own worst enemy. Shaka's paranoia reaches pathological levels. He sees disloyalty everywhere, cowardice in every hesitation, weakness in every human emotion. The death penalty, once reserved for looking backward in battle, now applies to dozens of offenses. Insufficient enthusiasm during royal ceremonies, failure to report suspicious conversations, showing concern for family over duty to the state. His half-brothers Dengane and Malangana watch in horror as the empire they helped build transforms into a prison state. The warrior culture that conquered southern Africa has become a mechanism for mass murder of its own people. But Shaka's greatest weakness isn't his cruelty, it's his inability to adapt his methods to peace. The psychological conditioning that works brilliantly for creating fearless warriors becomes a disaster for governing civilians. You cannot run a society the way you run an army, especially when that army's core principle is the elimination of human weakness. The breaking point comes during another of Shaka's increasingly frequent purges. Hundreds of people are executed on suspicion of witchcraft, their crime being nothing more than the king's paranoid imagination. The same people who once cheered his victories now cower in terror, knowing that tomorrow's accusation could fall on anyone. Dingain and Malangana realize what history will later confirm. The revolution must end its creator before it destroys everything it built. Tariduan. September 27, 1828, as Shaka reviews tribute from subject tribes, his half-brothers approach for what appears to be a routine audience. The same man who revolutionized warfare, who could read a battle like a book, who anticipated enemy moves before they made them, never sees the assegai coming. The 3 spear thrusts that kill Shaka aren't just regicide. They're the Empire's desperate attempt at self-preservation. The brothers who strike him down do so not from personal ambition, but from recognition that the system has become unsustainable. Shaka's final words, according to witnesses, reveal the tragic irony of his legacy. "You think you will rule when I am gone? The swallows, white colonizers, will come, and it will be they who rule you, even in death." The strategic genius who transformed African warfare sees what his successors cannot: the external threats that his internal revolution has left the empire unprepared to face. Shaka Zulu died at 41, having ruled for only 12 years. Yet in that brief span, he accomplished something unprecedented: the complete psychological reconstruction of warfare itself. His elimination of cowardice wasn't just a military tactic. It was a fundamental reimagining of human nature under extreme stress. By making retreat impossible, he discovered that humans are capable of far more courage than anyone previously believed. His warriors didn't just fight harder. They fought with a kind of mechanical fearlessness that their enemies found literally unbelievable. The numbers tell the story. A clan of 1/500 became an empire of 250,000. Traditional tribal skirmishes became total war. Seasonal cattle raids became permanent territorial conquest. Shaka didn't just win battles, he obsoleted an entire way of life. But the dark side of his legacy is equally profound. The same methods that eliminated cowardice also eliminated mercy, flexibility, and ultimately humanity itself. The psychological conditioning that created perfect warriors created a society incapable of peace. Modern military historians study Shaka's innovations with fascination and horror. His tactical formations influenced military thinking worldwide. The assegai and shield combination became standard equipment for colonial forces. His training methods presaged modern special forces conditioning, yet every military academy that teaches Shaka's tactics also teaches the cautionary tale of what happens when military efficiency becomes the sole organizing principle of society. The empire that conquered through eliminating weakness ultimately destroyed itself through eliminating everything else human. Perhaps, most tragically, Shaka's prophecy proved accurate. Within 50 years, British colonial forces would crush the Zulu kingdom using many of the same tactical innovations Shaka had pioneered. The empire built on military supremacy fell to opponents who combined his methods with industrial technology. Today, as we grapple with questions about discipline versus freedom, strength versus compassion, efficiency versus humanity, Shaka's story offers no easy answers. He proved that humans are capable of incredible courage when retreat becomes impossible. But he also proved that societies built on the elimination of human weakness ultimately eliminate their own humanity. The man who banned cowardice created one of history's most effective military forces. The same man's inability to allow any weakness in his system created one of history's most tragic examples of power consuming its creator. What would you have done faced with Shaka's choices? When does necessary discipline become destructive tyranny? And in our own age of increasing complexity, what can we learn from a leader who solved problems by eliminating the possibility of failure? The questions Shaka raised about courage, discipline, and the price of absolute strength remain as relevant today as they were 2 centuries ago in the hills of KwaZulu-Natal. If this incredible story of military genius and human tragedy has fascinated you, there are dozens more untold stories of African leaders who reshaped history through pure force of will. Subscribe to discover the hidden narratives that changed the world. And let us know in the comments. Do you think Shaka's methods were necessary for his time? Or was there another path to unifying the Zulu people? What's your take on leaders who achieve great things through terrible means? The conversation continues below.